Hello, everyone. Just going to talk about trade wars today and what does it mean in terms of trade wars and what does it mean in terms of the economy going forward, but also what does it mean for cryptocurrencies. Before I start, I'd like to say hello to Kevin. Hope you're well, Kevin. I'd like to say hello to Coco and Milky, beautiful dogs that I saw on the weekend from one of my supporters. I think they're called Labra poodles. I think that's how it works, or poodle labras, one of the two. Anyway, just wanted to start just with this whole trade war thing that President Trump is talking about. And there was a tweet on the weekend where he said that our country has lost millions and trillions of dollars with China over many years. They've stolen our intellectual property at the rate of $100 billion a year. And he said that he doesn't want that to continue. And he basically said that we don't need China. China obviously came back and said, they're really willing to resolve trade disputes with the US with calm negotiations. But then, Mr. Trump said that they wanted to impose 25% tariffs and on some goods up to 30% tariffs. So subsequently to that, the equity market weakened quite substantially. The Dow was off on Friday night 600 points. The Chinese renminbi, which is its own currency, weakened quite a lot, and obviously stock markets in Asia all turned down quite a lot. And certainly today in Asia, Australian time, and I'm in Australian time zone at the moment, everything turned down quite substantially. So this is pretty much playing out to how I thought it would. I did a YouTube 4 months ago about this, and this is exactly how I think things are starting to play out. And it's going to be pretty interesting to see where all this goes. But I was fairly active on Twitter on the weekend, and I did put some points on that, which I'll describe today as well. I'm going to do a couple of other YouTubes today, so you're going to get a couple out of me. Got a few things I want to say on different things as well. So before I say that, I hope you're all looking after yourself. I hope you're being kind to yourself, you're being kind to your animals, being kind to your family and friends, looking after your animals, as I said, looking after other people's animals, just being a kinder person, just being kinder in the world, because the world, as we can see, is not a very, very kind place. And, it doesn't take much to be kind, and to be kind to someone, and to be human, and to have empathy, and be, give some, humanity, and just to be kind, because so many people can be so horrible. But anyway, let's just go forward. So basically, President Trump cited emergency powers. He tweeted on Friday that American companies are hereby ordered to immediately start looking for an alternative to China. And then he expanded on this with a tweet today. He expanded on this, citing emergency economic powers, the Act of 1977, which is interesting. There is an international emergency economic pact, and apparently the President of the United States can enact this pact, and it basically can stop American companies from doing business with China. Apparently, ex-President Bill Clinton prohibited US people from doing things with the Sudan and other countries as well. So generally, this act is used to freeze assets of foreign governments and citizens, but apparently President Trump can use this to stop American businesses doing business with China, and also potentially Mexico as well, which is certainly going to make things very interesting going forward. And really is fairly serious for the world at large. China came back and fired back, and this fellow Hughes, I don't know how you pronounce his name, Hu Jin, says Trump is welcome to relocate GM, Ford and other automakers back to the US. This fellow is basically a reporter for the Global Times, editor, and basically is sort of the spokesman for the Chinese government, and said that President Trump could relocate Ford and other automakers back to the US. He said the Chinese could buy BMW, Volkswagen and Toyota instead. China is number one sales market for GM and Ford, so certainly their stocks are going to be down a lot today in the Dow tonight. The Dow your time, the Dow tonight is my time. So it's going to make it very, very interesting what's going to happen in the stock market tonight, that's for sure. I guess the thing is, with all this trade war, all these trade wars, basically, ultimately at the end of the day, it will increase unemployment. Okay, so basically, if these companies stop in China and they relocate back to America, it's going to increase unemployment in China, that is for sure. It's certainly going to reduce the receipts in America and the US, and it's going to increase unemployment because obviously whatever the US does, the Chinese will definitely retaliate with trade the other way, going back to the US. So it's not a great story for the whole world. It can lead, in my mind, to a global depression, not recession, depression, which basically the economic term for global depression is basically a recession is generally 2 quarters of negative GDP. 2 quarters of negative GDP is called a recession. But when you come to depression, it could be subsequently more quarters than that, and then we come into a depression with higher unemployment, and higher unemployment can move fairly quickly. Now we have seen that just in the latest statistics for the US, and certainly we've seen the statistics in China come out very bad of recent times. Certainly their GDP, their gross domestic product, which used to run at about 8%, is roughly about 5.6, 5.8 now, and that's come off quite substantially. And the Chinese need to run gross domestic product of around 8% to increase their employment. Now, if they don't run an 8% gross domestic product, they cannot increase their employment, and therefore they have a lot of people to employ. And it's just not going to cut it in terms of the economic growth they need for their employment. So things are not going to go very well going forward for the Chinese either. So my view of the world with all this going on, I went out on Twitter, so I'm watching a position in the market. I'm actually selling US dollars against yen, and I'm actually selling the US 30-year index, the Dow, as well. But my view of this, and I put this on Twitter on the weekend, was that I believe that equity markets will continue to go down. I think it's very bad, this US-Chinese trade, the trade tariffs and the war, because effectively it will make the US dollar go down against the yen, because people will buy yen as a safe haven. It'll make the yuan go down and the renminbi, which are the Chinese currency, which again, if the Chinese currencies go down, it makes them more competitive from a global perspective. It makes their goods so much cheaper than the rest of the world's, okay? Again, I do believe the US dollar could go through the yen at 100. Hasn't been there for a while, a long time, but I think it's going there. That's my view. The US dollar could go through the yen through 100. Currently, it's at 105.319. Did get down to about 104.4, but I do believe it could go through 100. Credit spreads are starting to blow. The cost of funding for corporate debt is starting to move up higher. There is a credit margin involved, not just the base curve of interest rates, but there is a cost of credit curve. If you're a AAA corporate or a AA or a triple B corporate, triple B being the lower of, say, AAA or AA, you're going to have a cost of credit from the bank, okay? There is a big risk here that China could sell their US Treasuries and bond holdings. Now, China has the largest holdings of US bonds and Treasuries in the world for non-US residents. And currently they hold about 1.13 billion of US Treasuries and bonds. Now, China could use that as a retaliatory action against the US, and it would not surprise me if they did that. Now, if they did that, they have a lot of their own corporate debt maturing very soon. They could effectively dump 1.13 trillion US dollar bonds and treasuries into the market all at once. They could do this, and what do you think that would do to the US dollar bond curve? Effectively, they're selling US dollar bonds and treasuries. It would force yields straight up. If yields went up dramatically, and I think there's a real risk here, that's my view, equity markets will absolutely move down even more, like 1,000, 2,000 points, okay? I don't want to be, I don't want to be sort of sounding dramatic here, but it's a real thing. There was an article here in Reuters probably a couple of months ago. Will the Chinese, sell the US Treasuries? Their holdings have been getting lower and lower and lower all year. They were closer to 2 trillion, and now they've been reducing. But it would not surprise me if they look at this. Now we're also seeing a global growth declining, and we're seeing it in Europe's biggest economy being Germany. Okay, Germany had some very bad growth come out. Their gross domestic product was very bad. Their business sentiment surveys were quite negative as well. So what I think we're going to see is increased unemployment, particularly in the finance industry and banking. We're going to see much more volatility in fiat currency, particularly US against the yen. People will buy yen, they will buy Scandinavian, Norwegian krona, they'll buy the Swiss, and they'll sell any risk currency, which they see the Canadian dollar as risk currency, the Aussie dollar they see as risk currency. They'll sell the US against the yen. They'll sell the Asian currencies, the emerging market debt currencies, the Thai baht, even the pound. I mean, the pound going through Brexit is another calamity in itself. Seriously, it just goes on and on. If you have a look at this, China, Japan holdings of US Treasuries, China has the largest, and Japan also holds quite a lot. But if you look at this, China was up here. The peak was here, and it's come down quite a bit. There's nothing to stop these guys, if they want to, China, from selling US Treasuries and bonds in the market and just literally flooding the US market with bonds. Now, if that happens, prices go down when you sell, bond prices go down when you sell, and yields go up. It's a completely inverse relationship in terms of bonds, okay? Prices go down, yields go up, okay? Now, there's been a couple of articles about this. Will they retaliate? Again, there was an article about May. Would they retaliate and use the US Treasuries as a weapon, okay, against this whole trade war story? And look, they could. There's no doubt about it. Okay, so China has plenty of levers to pull. It's not just about them putting on embargoes with the US in terms of more trade tariffs from their perspective. They can keep allowing their own currency to plunge, and as I said, that makes it cheaper for the rest of the world to buy their goods, because as their currency plunges, my currency becomes worth more, okay? They could also block the export of rare earth minerals, which they have and no one else has. They can also boycott iPhones, which apparently, are made in China, and a lot of goods are made in China, and other American goods like cars, for example. And as I said, they can sell bonds, and they can certainly sell treasuries. The editor, this fellow here, and again, I've mentioned him, he's the editor-in-chief of the Chinese and English editions of the Global Times, said China may stop purchasing US agricultural products and energy, reduce Boeing orders, and restrict US service trade with China. There's even, as I said before, and I've said this ages ago, Chinese scholars are discussing the possibility of dumping US treasuries. Now, this would be a seriously, seriously dangerous move. And the reason why is because it would destabilize every fiat market out there dramatically. If they start selling US treasuries, the US equity market could fall thousands and thousands of points, okay? Now, you might say, oh, I don't have any position in the US equities, but if you look at your 401k, your superannuation fund, most people have 60% of their superannuation fund invested in equities, most people. Australia, we have equities, we have a balanced fund. People say, oh, no, I don't have any equities. But if you look at your super fund, 60% of your super fund will be invested in equities, okay? Equity market goes down, your super money, your super fund will go down. And if you're in 401k, which I think it's called over in America, it's the same thing, okay? It's going to be very, very bad indeed. The Dow, as I said, looked very toppy to me 4 months ago. I called it 4 months ago. You can have another YouTube I did 4 months ago. It looks very bad technically, and it could come off very, very fast, okay? It's at very high, lofty levels, and it could come off thousands and thousands of points. It could come down to 14,000 quite easily as far as I'm concerned. And at the moment, what is it? 25,500. So you could come down a lot. Seriously, a lot. Also, my Twitters that I put out, my view of the world, again, Asian currencies, some of them are too high, like the Thai baht. Bugger, how do I get back to that? That's annoying. Don't know how to go back now. Some are too high, like the Thai baht. Here we go. Sorry about that. From current slide. I think we will see a sell-off in emerging market Asian currencies, which is also going to destabilize Asia. The yield curve will steepen, in my view. If US Treasuries start to sell on bonds, the yield curve will steepen. In other words, long rates will go up quite quickly. No doubt about that. You'll get more and more volatility in the fiat market, and you could see that volatility potentially being higher than cryptocurrency volatility, like XRP and Bitcoin. Okay, that volatility could be a lot higher. The market going forward is going to be much more aware of crypto land, particularly with Facebook, and I just think it's going to be more knowledgeable going forward. So the thing is, in my mind, the cryptocurrency market looks like it's bottoming to me. Yes, it's been selling off and it's come down, and yes, Bitcoin's broken 10,000 the way down. But, I believe it's been a bear market for a year and a half. It's starting to bottom. That is my view, and I believe we are going to see a bear market in the fiat markets going forward. Absolutely. And we're going to see big moves here. The alts look cheap to me, 0.16. The cryptocurrency market looks like it's bottoming. This is my view. Okay, it's not investment advice, but it is my view. Okay. Number 19, UK Brexit will be disaster. As far as I can see, I've done work in Holland. A lot of firms are moving to Holland. They're moving out of the UK. It's going to be a disaster. It's been handled very, very poorly by the politicians. I don't think they've thought it through. It's cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. The Irish problem is going to raise its head. It's going to be a hard Brexit. What are they going to do with the Irish border? Parts of Ireland which, are still controlled, and if you want to call it owned by, by the UK and controlled by the UK to some degree, because obviously they have people that are more aligned to the UK with the Protestant infringement there. I don't know a lot about it, but it is not going to be a nice story. That could raise its ugly head again. Again, as I said, the Chinese growth story and unemployment could get worse. And again, that's going to be very bad for other parts of Asia as well as Australia. We export a lot of goods to China, a lot of goods. And, the Chinese are big tourists here and everything else. To add to that mix, also that there is very worrying signs about what's going on in Hong Kong, I have to say. People may not be aware of it over in America, but the pro-democracy demonstrations are getting larger and larger. There's over 1 million people demonstrating on the weekend against China. Now, as you know, the Hong Kong Chinese are very different to the mainland Chinese. They're under British rule up until 1997. Then it went back to China. They have a different mentality, and it's very much a concern what's going to happen over there, I have to say. Also China has a very big military government. They have an imbalance in the population, more than 60 million men in their population that can't find wives because obviously, they had this one baby policy, one child policy, and they're actually for hundreds of centuries of years, doing away with the female child or not, or the female child, whatever happened. So there's an imbalance of 60 million people, which is a bit of a problem, and it's male based. So what does it mean in terms of cryptocurrency land? We've also seen that China set up its own cryptocurrency. Now, the relevance of this is it doesn't need to go through SWIFT. The US SWIFT system, right? The SWIFT system we talk about when we talk about XRP, how quick XRP is, and the SWIFT system so slow. China doesn't have to go through SWIFT. For years and years, they've been doing their own and working up their own settlement system so they can avoid SWIFT. Okay, they're doing more deals with Russia. the thing is, if they don't need to use SWIFT, the US cannot put monetary sanctions on them. In other words, close down their accounts, stop them, block their accounts, stop them from using their own funds in the US and this sort of thing. They can literally bypass the US, okay, with their own national currency or cryptocurrency. Again, they don't need to do any dealings with the US with a digital currency. And there is some story that they're actually doing a lot of dealing with Russia at the moment. And Russia and China seem to be partners and seem to be good friends, if you want to call it that, which is not great for the US, I have to say, from a strategic point of view. Again, there's a story up here that Russia and China are doing a lot with Tether. The Russians and the Chinese are not giving away, but they're exchanging money for Tether, US Tether. So the implications of this is, if we look at Russia's population, we've got 144 million people that are in Russia, and we've got a Chinese population of 100.386 billion. So there's a total of 1.53 billion out of the world's population of 7.7 billion. That's 20% of the world's population that may not deal with the US, okay, that is trying to potentially avoid dealing with the US. Now, the thing is, if all of a sudden Russia and China decide to deal with cryptocurrencies outside the fiat markets, and it looks like it's sort of potentially setting up to be like that, then this going forward will be huge for cryptocurrency, and it'll also loosen the control that the US has on these two nations, particularly in terms of closing down their bank accounts in the US and the control of their own funds. If the Chinese and the Russians do not use SWIFT, the settlement system, the old clunky settlement system I've spoken about before, then the US has no way of putting any sort of embargoes on them in terms of cash flow or their own currency amounts. Another thing I want to bring to light is the Russian and Chinese have built this huge gas line between each other, between Russia and between northwestern China. It's the longest gas line in the world. It's actually underground with underground tunnels, and where China is basically importing natural gas from Russia. It is huge, and it hasn't really been caught that much by the Western press, but it just shows you how strategically aligned Russia and China are, even to the stage that they have underwater tunnels between one country to another, where there could be the movement, if you wanted to call it that, movement of, anything, people, resources, goods, anything. I know this sounds crazy, but the thing is, you could even move troops, in an underwater tunnel, in terms of if there was going to be, say, a war, for example. So it's just something I wanted to bring up. I'm not saying anything, but it's just very interesting to me that 20% of the world population, could potentially, be outside of the, certainly outside of the control of the other G7 and Western nations. That's for sure. Very, very interesting indeed.
Anyway, this is all just food for thought. So please do look after yourself. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to your family and friends. Be kind to your animals, your putty cats, your dogs. Love them. Be kind to animals. Be kind to anyone. And just make this world a better place. Thanks, guys, for listening. Thank you, and girls. Thank you.